Welcome to this Marvel Snap guide, where we're going to be talking about 10 Pool 3 exclusive deck lists to help you in Marvel Snap. The great thing about these deck lists is they're all Pool 3 exclusive, and they also utilize cards that just got dropped down to Pool 3, including Maria Hill, Helicarrier, and Agent Coulson. This guide is designed to help you get started with some brand new archetypes and help you experiment with these new cards amongst others in Marvel Snap. If you like this series, consider hitting the like button, and if you want to see more of this, I'm going to do it every month after every single series drops, so consider hitting the subscribe button so you don't miss out on that video. With that being said, let's get started with deck number 1. It may come to no surprise to you that Devil Dinosaur is still one of the best cards in Marvel Snap. This 5/3 can output some of the most power in the game, although it is countered by both Shang-Chi, Enchantress, and Rogue. A lot of counters available, but it is one of the best cards in the game at just straight up putting an immense amount of power on a given location. You have a couple options with this particular deck. You do have the card generation capabilities of Cable, Sentinel, and Agent Coulson, which is recently dropped down to Pool 3, but this particular version also utilizes a couple key figures, including Daredevil, to allow you to use a predictive play with Professor X. Now, traditional versions of Devil Dinosaur would have something like a Moon Girl, which is a viable option as well, that would allow you to replicate the Devil Dinosaur to play Devil Dinosaur on 5 and then Devil Dinosaur again on 6. But this more simplistic playstyle allows you to lock down a location with Professor X, ensuring that you're putting as much value as you can to a given lane, while then locking down that Professor X location and then playing a turn 6 Devil Dinosaur with all the power you've generated with all the additional draw in your hand. The amazing thing about Quinjet as well is that it also discounts your Sentinels to 1 cost, because the Sentinels come back to your hand. That allows you to play a Sentinel and a Devil Dinosaur in your hand, while the Sentinel does replenish itself, allowing Devil Dinosaur to remain topped up. Overall, this is a very consistent list and one that you can kind of rely on as you kind of fight through the ranks of Marvel Snap. In the current meta, Lockjaw's popularity has absolutely skyrocketed, mainly because of Thanos, but Lockjaw in and of itself is starting to get a lot of play because just pulling out free massive cards is kind of awesome, and it feels really good. It's a little bit of a gambling style deck, but Lockjaw is really emerging in the meta, and guess what? There is a Pool 3 exclusive list that you can utilize to really take advantage of that. And the great thing about that is that you can use someone like Maria Hill, because Maria Hill offers you a 2-drop that not only gives you a 2-drop, but it also gives you a 1-cost card that you can then play into the Lockjaw, and if it's something like an Iceman, then you get to proc Iceman's ability and then cycle him out, put him into the deck, pull something big out, while also kind of impacting their hand, right? So there's some interesting synergy between Maria Hill and Lockjaw, and is one of the more natural fits for her outside of Zoo. You do have Wasp, of course, and Wasp is utilized to basically play on turn 3 in conjunction with Lockjaw, and Wasp also gets pulled back out by Jane Foster, so that's great too. So on turn 6, you have a free play into the Lockjaw as well. Outside of that, you have Dracula, which can be very useful for just hitting whatever remains in your hand. You have a ton of big options, and so you want to hit something, right? And that's exactly why you have something like Jubilee to pull these massive cards out of your hand. Vision's great too, because if you pull Vision with Jubilee, you can move it where you want, or if you pull Vision out from Lockjaw, you can move it and continue to play in the Lockjaw. The amazing thing about Thor is that you can use Mjolnir to basically feed Mjolnir into the Lockjaw and then cycle a new card out. So there's a lot of cycling happen here. It is very gambling oriented, but it is also a very good deck if you're looking to high roll and win some cubes. Okay, so for this deck here, we're utilizing Helicarrier because we want to incorporate as many of the newly dropped cards as we can. Now, this is the only time we're talking about Helicarrier, and also the only time in this video that I'm going to have a small disclaimer. So Helicarrier is one of those kind of awkward cards where, like, I think that it's kind of missing some major synergies, and this deck I don't think is as consistent as the others in this list. We want to incorporate Helicarrier somewhere so this deck list works. But unfortunately, this deck really does not work without MODOK, which is technically not a Pool 3 card. It's a Season Pass card, which you just might have if you bought the Season Pass. This is the only deck in this entire video that does this, because Helicarrier is a very awkward build around right now and really only works in this capacity. This deck already is somewhat inconsistent, and without MODOK, it's outright garbage. So I've had to just give you some pre-warning that MODOK is in this list, because without it, this deck doesn't work, okay? And basically the way it works is you have Helicarrier, you have the Collector, and basically the idea is that every time you add a card not in your hand, to your hand that's not from your deck, Collector gains a +1. Helicarrier adds 3. You have the Morbius into the Mystique play. The nice thing about this is that when you Wong on turn 4, so basically you Collector or Morbius on turn 2, and then on turn 3 you can Morbius, and then turn 4 you can Wong, and then on turn 5 you MODOK, and what happens is you absolutely blow up your hand. You get rid of the Helicarrier, Collector runs up, Morbius runs up, and then what happens is Wong procs again, and then what happens is that the cards that Helicarrier brought in get discarded, running up Morbius even more, and the swarms replicate over and over again as well, running up the Collector and also Morbius as well. So it's like this very combo-centric deck around Wong and MODOK, and then usually what you do is you just play the Apocalypse with all the zero-cost swarms on your turn 6, right? That's kind of the plan here, but again, it's much less consistent than the other decks in this list. Helicarrier's in this weird spot right now. Like, I wouldn't recommend this particular deck, but it is kind of the go-to deck if you're trying to play some Helicarrier. Despite the buffs to Sandman, Deathwave still remains a very competent deck list. The reason for this is because outside of the initial experimentation period with Sandman, the actual Sandman archetype has like kind of waned a little bit. Like, it's still really good, especially in ramp, and we're going to talk about that later, but with the Sandman archetype kind of falling off a little bit, and like a lot more people are trying to play Thanos right now, for instance, you have this opportunity to play classic Deathwave where it's just still damn good. You have answers like Shang-Chi, but most importantly, you turn 5 Wave, which conserves 2 energy. So turn 5 Wave by itself, that allows your She-Hulk, right, to drop down and only be a 2 cost, your Arrow to be a 4 cost, that's 6, and throughout the course of the game, you should have, with Carnage, Killmonger, and others, and Deathlock, you should be able to get a 0 cost death because you just have to kill 4 things, or destroy 4 things, I should say, and then death becomes free with the use of Wave. So you can play 3 cards on turn 6, one of which disrupts the positioning of the opponent. This is what makes this deck so crazy. You play the Arrow on turn 6, it disrupts their positioning, and then you have a 10 and a 12 that you can play at the same time to win the other 2 lanes. So use Arrow to pull them in a losing direction and basically consolidate your wins with She-Hulk and Death at the same time. That's what makes this deck so good, and that's why I think it's one of the best decks to turn to, especially as Sandman loses popularity. We just spoke about Sandman and how it can negatively impact the Deathwave combination, because when you have something like a Sandman, the newly changed 5/5 Sandman that has the ongoing of each player can only play 1 card per turn, obviously Deathwave isn't going to function. None of the major combo decks are going to function well. Thanos won't function well, and the nice thing about Sandman is that on turn 5, you disrupt his turn 6 combo. But what if you get him out on turn 4 thanks to Electro? And that's exactly what this deck list does. Basically what you do is you have a traditional ramp style list. I like Sunspot and Ebony Maw because Ebony Maw gives you a lot of access with someone like Dr. Doom's Doombots and Odin, of course. So Ebony Maw is not really by itself because those little Doom bots will be going in there to support it. You have Wave as a backup plan if you don't draw your Electro. Chavez is important here because Chavez increases the chance for your Electro and Wave on turn 3. If you don't have them on turn 3, you're in a retreat situation. Captain Marvel is great because of course it can access the Ebony Maw location, but more importantly, when you have Sandman on the board, what happens is the Captain Marvel is going to give you the option to kind of move into a winning position because it can be hard to play more than 1 card, and that's why Dr. Doom and Odin are so good with Sandman, because you spread the power so effectively, which your opponent's unlikely to be able to do. Other than that, this deck list is a very strong deck list. It utilizes the brand new buff Sandman. I think this is the go-to deck if you're looking to play the newly buffed Sandman. Now, I know many of you guys haven't played Zoo since Pool 1, but guess what? There is a modern version of Zoo that you can experiment with in Marvel Snap, and the good news about it is it's pretty cool, and there's a couple interesting combinations here. Now, the first thing is you want to kind of leave space for your Khazar Blue Marvel Onslaught combination. Khazar is going to give all your 1-drops +1. Blue Marvel gives everything +1, and then Onslaught doubles that, but they have to be in the same lane, so you kind of want to conserve space. That's why Squirrel Girl's not in this list, but you can use Squirrel Girl if you want. The major combinations you really need to know about, Ant-Man and Iceman need no introduction, but you have Zero, and Zero's key because you're going to hit Zero with Titania. If you don't have Zero Titania, you could do Zero into Lizard, which is great because the -3 power gets taken off Lizard. He's a consistent 2/5, which is great. So Zero impacts both Titania and Lizard, but has limited capabilities if you don't have those 2 cards to play after, so please be aware of that. Maria Hill's pretty interesting here because it adds an additional 1-cost card to your hand, which is great because it's a 2/3 on its own, but when you play the additional card, it's something that gets buffed by Khazar and Blue Marvel and Onslaught as well. Mr. Fantastic helps you go wide while also getting buffed by Blue Marvel, and Wolfsbane represents a pretty decent closer on a given lane. A lot of options here to play. Armor is one of those cards that just protects you against Killmonger. Now, you don't even really need the armor. Sounds crazy, right? But the thing about Killmonger is that, like, if you're against a Deathwave Killmonger list, you probably just have to retreat anyways. You lose the 1 cube, and like you figure that out early, right? You don't play deep into double snaps against the Deathwave style list. You just don't do that when you're playing Zoo. You recognize that matchup. So I actually, when I experiment with this list, I often take armor out at times to experiment with something else. You can even play Squirrel Girl. There are different options you can play, obviously, and At the end of the day, it's up to you, right? Because I think that Modern Zoo is pretty fun to play, and it's a very straightforward play pattern, but it doesn't have like any massive power spikes on any given lane, but it's a very consistent deck that allows you to experiment in Marvel Snap. Electro ramp is one of my favorite decks to play in Marvel Snap, and it's very similar to that of the Sandman ramp, except what you're doing here is instead of using something like a Sandman, you're using Leech instead. They have different flavors, right? Leech has a very like disabling ability, whereas Sandman has a very restrictive ability. So it's a little bit of a different flavor, very similar design. You are doing Iceman, Scorpion, Lizard. Lizard's good because you want to maintain initiative because you don't want to have Cosmo slid under your Doctor Doom or Odin. You do have Vision, which gives you a lot of added mobility. Good options would include Captain Marvel if you don't want to play Vision, or if you have Captain Marvel. You have the Disruption of Arrow. The Doctor Doom into Odin combo is just so blessed. It's one of my favorite in the game. Chavez to increase the opportunity of you to draw Electro Wave. And finally Magneto, which is incredibly disruptive and obviously a 6/12 in and of itself. The key thing here is if you can get Wave out on turn 4, it's usually a snap condition. You Wave, or usually you want to Electro. Electro is kind of your primary because like if you Electro, it benefits you. You only want to play one card per turn anyway. Wave gives them a counterplay as well. So you generally want to Electro first and then Leech on turn 4. And like if they have a wide hand, like they're just dismantled. Like there's nothing they can do. So if you have Electro Leech, you usually snap going into that turn. Wave, it's less confident because they can play a massive card or play a major combo or play their Doctor Doom or whatever. So and you're playing a low impact Leech where he's playing 15 power across the board, right? So Wave's a little riskier. Electro Leech is insane. But overall, I really do like this list as a very straightforward play pattern. One that if you're kind of new to the game and just kind of experimenting in Pool 3, it's one that you can get around. And there's also very clean substitutions. Like if you don't have Magneto, you can use Hulk and stuff like that. Like you just need big bodies and you can find them. The Invisible Aggro list is a really fun list that I enjoy playing in Marvel Snap. In fact, I'm going to give a shout out to Kunko and to Educated Collins, who kind of really put this list on the radar. And essentially what you do here is you use 0 with Titania, 0 with Ebony Maw, you use 0 with Lizard, 0 with Maximus. There's so many 0 hits here. There's so many 0 hits. And if you don't have those hits, you just hide them behind Invisible Woman. And guess what happens? Ebony Maw on turn 2, you can still play on Invisible Woman. It's no problem. You play Maximus on Invisible Woman, they don't get the card draw till the end of the game. Who cares? The one concern is if you play Titania on Invisible Woman, it has to be the last card you play because she will bounce back and forth at the end of the game, which can be a little frustrating. Hiding Shang-Chi behind Invisible Woman is a lot of fun. The key thing is that when you play Invisible Woman and they play Cosmo and they got all like, haha, I played Cosmo, you're like, okay, man, like who cares, right? Like it doesn't matter. Nothing here really matters. You have the Doctor Doom play for spreading your power, especially if you want to access that Ebony Maw location. I love She-Hulk. If you play She-Hulk early because you've conserved mana, like if you play her on like turn 3 or something because you've managed to conserve that much mana, what's interesting about that is that like when you play it behind the Invisible Woman, they're not considering a turn 3 play setting up 10 power. Like it just doesn't happen. So you really surprise people with the power output with this Invisible Woman list. You're not going to believe this, but I had so much success piloting and testing this deck list. I didn't lose a single game playing Mr. Negative Pool 3 only. And I have so many cards like that I could utilize in the Mr. Negative deck. And I played this version and I absolutely crushed guys with it. It was so fun to test this deck list out. And the nice thing about it too is that like if you have Zabu, he's a very natural fit here. Basically what you want to do is you want to get Mr. Negative out as fast as possible. Get him out on turn 3. That's a win condition, a snap condition in fact, because the more cards you draw, the easier it becomes. Basically what you do here is you Psylocke turn 2, Negative on turn 3. If you have Zabu, you play Zabu on turn 2, and then you play Mr. Negative on turn 3. The best play in the game, of course, is drawing a negative Iron Man here, which is going to be a 0/5, and you have the 0/3 Mystique that copies the Iron Man. Like, there's almost no deck that can deal with that output of power. You do it on turn 6, those cards come down for free, and then everything else is just gravy. Like, it's insane what you're capable of. You generally have the benefit of playing Magic here, and the reason why Magic is so good, because you play it on turn 5, you extend the game. The key thing to understand about Mr. Negative is that every single additional draw you have is a negative card, and every single draw is like amplifying the power and your ability to win the game significantly. And that's why Magic is so key here. And Sarah just allows you to kind of get out more cards because you naturally start with cards in your hand. So you're going to want to get at least 1 or 2 of those out because that's what you utilize your mana, because the other cards are almost free, right? Like you pay 1 mana for Wolfsbane on turn 7, and then you can play Blue Marvel if he's still 5, and like you still have an extra mana, and you get everything that you had for free, including Iron Man, Mystique, Ironheart, or whatever, right? So Angela too. So there's a lot of options with the Mr. Negative deck. It really is a stressful turn 6-7 style deck list, and if you got the patience for it, you can win some cubes. Classic Control. I mean, there's nothing better than playing straight up Classic Control in Pool 3. I mean, this is one of those deck lists that really isn't all that fancy. You just disrupt the opponent's game plan all the way through. Every deck has like a game plan. This one's just ruined their game plan, basically. I mean, you got Sunspot, which just gives you an incredible amount of value. You armor the Sunspot, you storm that location, you Juggernaut after, and like that location is just one. They can't do anything. They can't do anything. If you don't have that combo by turn 5, you should be able to set up something for a Daredevil Professor X combination, lock it down. If you lock down the Sunspot, you can still ramp up the Sunspot. Keep that in mind. It's one of the advantages of a Sunspot Professor X combo. Moreover, you have the She-Hulk, so when you skip turns, right, you get the value generated back. So if you skip turns, Sunspot ramps, but She-Hulk becomes less expensive. So you can have a situation where you skip turn 5, for instance, and you can play like Arrow She-Hulk together. Or you skip turn 5 and you drop the Infinite. You have a consistent play. And you know if you have the Infinite because you have Chavez. Chavez is always coming out on turn 6, so that on turn 5, if you don't have the Infinite but you're holding She-Hulk Arrow, you know that if you skip with Sunspot, you can play both She-Hulk and Arrow next turn because She-Hulk's going to be a 1, Arrow's a 5. You disrupt them, win it with the Arrow. So super classic control. I love this deck. It's probably, once you get used to it, it's probably like the highest win rate of all these lists because like you just have answers. You win, you guarantee a win location, and if you have Shang-Chi as well to like really clean up any crazy plays on turn 6. So like there are so many options here. And the great thing about the She-Hulk is if you skip turn 5, you can Shang-Chi, and you can She-Hulk to generate power and disrupt their ability to play. So there's so many options with this deck list. If you're going to experiment with only one, and you're like, Alex, I'm looking for one deck, I think this is probably the one. This is evergreen. It'll never get old. It'll always feel fun, and you'll always have answers to what the meta provides. With that being said, guys, I have another video down below. Check it out if you're interested in seeing more Marvel Snap content. I'd appreciate it if you hit the like button. Subscribe if you're interested in seeing more of these videos. I do them every single month. And with that being said, I appreciate all of you guys, and we'll see you in the next Marvel Snap video.